Okay, hey, we're into another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff to have a really cool comparison for you guys from the brand NOMOS. They're a German brand founded back in 1990 by Ronald Schwertner and has since grown to become the largest manufacturer of mechanical timepieces in all of Germany. In terms of the type of watch, these are, I think it even falls into just kind of encapsulating their brand image, which is, they're kind of the kings of the everyday dress watch. Those clean, classic minimalist designs, of course, all at very sensibly sized options. Now, again, I think their place within the market is really, really strong. The only other really popular dress watches I would say would be something like Grand Seiko, at least within the same elevated yet affordable range, but those definitely skew way more towards the sporty side, whereas NOMOS will always be skewing more towards the dressy side, even with their sportier models. Now, today I'm going to be actually comparing two different Metro models in two different sizes. So you're going to have the Metro Date Power Reserve reference 1101, which goes for $3,780. And then also you're going to have that comparing it next to the Metro Neomatik 39 Silvercut reference 1114, which goes for $42.80. And these were, the original design of the Metro was designed by Mark Braun. It's meant to be young and sophisticated, and really just glasoot through and through. So that power reserve indicator, it not only can be a reminder to rewind the watch, but it's also one of the design features. Like, it looks really cool. It's very interesting. It's offset, and thus kind of the whole dial is a bit offset because of that, and it makes it a lot of fun. Now, the Silvercut is kind of an automatic version, of course, that has this great dial that I've really been dying to see in person. So big shout out to NOMOS for sending these pieces in for me to spend some time with. It's meant to be a bit more striking, a little bit larger, but still incredibly slender, thanks to its Neomatik calendar. So these are very, very nice, and I'm looking forward to getting into the details with you guys. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys. Now, in terms of how, these look and how they wear, it's very close. I know as you're looking at it, you can see this is clearly the smaller watch, but it's going to get pretty dicey once I actually get these on wrist, at least for some of you. At least it was for me. I went into this thinking that this 39 millimeter size was going to be better for me, and when they listed at 39, it's actually 38 and a half. This 37 millimeter model is actually 37 millimeters. It has an 8 millimeter thickness versus 8.5 millimeters, which honestly, you can't really tell that half a millimeter very much, which makes it even more impressive that you have an automatic movement versus a manual wind. But my gosh, both of them look absolutely gorgeous. I will say, though, because this is a dressier watch, there's not a lot of, and it's super thin at that, there's not a lot of room for dampening. So some of you might not like the sound of this movement, if you are doing something a little bit more active. Let me get it closer here. You're going to get a little bit of sound there, probably more than you might like if you were trying to go for something ultra dressy, which I think works because this is going to be a little bit on the sportier side in terms of that dial, in terms of the colorways, whereas this one's definitely going to feel a little bit more dressy, but because of the pops of color is beautifully done for casual wear. Of course, you do have the manual movement, which isn't going to make a sound, guys. There's no rotor and ball bearings or anything like that. It's all much tighter tolerances when it's only manual wind, and it is gorgeous, guys. Really fantastic. So on both of these, again, it's very close in terms of the specs, although visually they appear, quite different in size. Another thing is the lug-to-lug, 43 millimeters versus 44 and a half. They both have domed sapphire crystals, push-pull crowns that are signed. So you'll see the little, and when I say little, it is. It's let me get it to focus there. Little NOMOS font there across the text. So very nice. And then in terms of kind of some of the differences between these calibers, you're going to have the manual caliber DUW4401 on the manual line version, which has a 42-hour power reserve, 3 hertz, versus the DUW3001, which is going to have a 43-hour power reserve, and it's also automatic, so it's going to save you from rewinding a little bit as well. Also beating at 3 hertz, which is 21,600 vibrations per hour. And because of the small seconds indicators here, there, and these subdials, you kind of don't need a higher beat rate, because it's already, when it's small like that and you don't have a long hand centrally located for the seconds, it still is going to be quite smooth. So that's one of the things people don't necessarily always consider when they're thinking about the beat rate. So really nice, on that end. Now, getting to these dials, of course, they're all printed with painted hands and they do utilize colors really, really well, even across these different themes. This one has this galvanized white silver plated dial with the date at 6 o'clock. Of course, then the power reserve indicator being offset clockwise under the 12 o'clock. Versus this dial, which is going to actually be a beautiful rhodium plated silver dial. And man, is it just, I would say one thing to be aware of is that it's going to appear more silver in a lot of the photography, but in real life it renders a lot more gray. So you can see it wants to capture those darker hues. Hopefully I'm able to really showcase that on, like, a lot of the pictures you're going to see is like when it's fully gleaming. But when you get into like the actual nitty gritty of how this is going to look, a lot of times when you look down at it, it's going to be that deeper gray tone. So really handsome. And again, something a little bit different than I thought. I thought it was going to be a little bit more on the brighter silver, but I will say it is more on the gray tone. And I think the, simpler monochromatic layout with just the pops of red definitely creates a different focus, which is cool. And this is, of course, there's no date complication. There's no power reserve indicator. It's all just very, very balanced and very nice. Also, another difference is going to be the water resistance. Here, you're going to have 3 atmospheres or 30 meters versus 5 atmospheres or 50 meters. So in terms of spec wise, the Neomatik is the more expensive watch, and it kind of should be, because it does have more advanced specs. Now, getting into the end links, and there's really no end links here because these aren't bracelet models, but getting into the lug widths and the straps, you're going to have basically 18 millimeters versus 19. And I know that doesn't sound like a big difference for me with a larger wrist, though that is, because I'm comfortable with 19 millimeter straps, not necessarily that comfortable with 18 millimeter straps. But the nice thing is here, you only get a minor taper. So this is only going to taper down by 1 millimeter on either one of these. So the 19 millimeter is going to taper down to 18. The 18 millimeter is going to taper down to 17. So you're not going to have that super thin, let's say 16 or 14 millimeter taper that you might associate with thinner straps. So if you have a larger wrist, or you just want kind of a more masculine look, you shouldn't have to worry about these. Even for me and my larger wrist, it actually, these worked out really well. So with that said, let's actually get these on the wrist and see how they wear. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this fits really great. Again, although it's marketed as a 39, they're just rounding up. It is 38.5, and I think it looks fantastic. Of course, if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to see a bit of perspective distortion, and it's going to appear a bit larger than it really is. So I'll just keep this down low and bring in the frame there, just so you guys can get a more detailed look while still getting a truer aspect ratio. And you can see, because of that wire lug design, it just sits really beautifully centered, and it's not elongated by its lug to lug, really at all, which I can't say for every NOMOS model, but I will say here you're pretty safe if you're worried about longer lug to lugs. I think this looks great. And the crazy thing is, of course, I expected it to. This was kind of out of my reasoning when I was looking at these and kind of cross shopping. I was like, oh, I think this will be the one for me. And I think you guys can all agree that that looks very nice and tidy. But then comes along this guy here, which isn't, you know, it is substantially smaller, but doesn't feel substantially smaller. But somehow, to my eye, it just looks more balanced. I don't know. I'm very surprised by this, guys. And I'm, you know, again, I'm not a big dress watch aficionado. I typically collect a lot of sports watches, but stuff like this, you know, where it just has that focus on the dressy aspect, I really respect and I really, really appreciate. So if we bring in now the frame, check that out. Does that look undersized to you? Because in my mind, I thought a 37 and this style, because of, you guys just saw how well it was able to kind of shrink down that 38 and a half to look very, very nice. But it does have, again, a huge dial and really no bezel. This dial is pushed to the extremities of that case. So you do get a lot of visual punch. So I was just really surprised about that. And honestly, this dial is probably larger than a lot of the dials on larger watches that I'm very comfortable wearing. So that was definitely something that was a huge kind of enlightening moment for me. I was like, oh man, I think this looks fantastic. Now, am I saying I'm going to go down to a 35? No, I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. And also the lug width, it plays a lot of, you know, into that. And, you know, I still feel like maybe this 18 millimeter strap might look a little thin on my wrist. And some of you, of course, depending on the occasion, depending on the attire, this might feel right at home, especially if it was going to be more on, let's say, the slightly dressier side. Whereas here with the 19 millimeter lug width, I would say, you know, the thickness on the strap looks right at home, definitely more in my comfort zone. But because of that dial being so expansive, and then even having that flat brush on it, it almost elongates it and makes it feel even wider, especially considering how thin this still is. This is only marginally thicker, although it is, you know, I would say more than marginally wider. So it actually does give it a flatter appearance. And maybe it just expands the look more than I was expecting. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Which one suits my larger 7.5-inch wrist better? I am absolutely torn. I went into it thinking this was going to really be the one that was going to be at the sweet spot. And I have to say, the classic, which is great news because this is cheaper. If I ever do purchase one and add it to the collection, I do know that the more affordable model is, you know, maybe even a better fit for me, which I dig. And some of you might be looking and saying, oh man, that thing looks tiny. If you think that's the case, let me know, warn me, scare me, because you never know. One of these might get added to my collection and I want to make sure it's the right one. Actually, as they might, I mean, ultimate goal, right? If I had more, you know, disposable income, I would absolutely add. I'd want to add a NOMOS to my collection, if not more than one, especially now with some of these newer sporty models that have come out with 200 meters, 300 meters, and even maybe of water resistance, that just strike a really cool chord of thin, kind of dressy, artistic type of watches. But there are no, you know, there's no loom, so there'll be no loom shots here, but we can get in some low light transition and closing thoughts though. So let's do that. Okay, let's go ahead and have the lights here. All right, no loom, but as you can see, I do like to work in a bit of a low light transition because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or maybe just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And you can see here when it comes to light play, that Silvercut, ooh, look at this, a lot more dynamic. Which some of you might be looking for, which some of you might enjoy, or some of you might love the more sedate and consistent look of just the classic hand wind model. Oh my goodness, that is just it. These are lookers, guys. I mean, just fantastic. Of course, if I get into more harsh, high contrast lighting situations, you typically could, you know, expose any types of you know, maybe a production defect here or there, but you can see with an all polished case, all you're going to notice on the casework reflecting is, you know, some fingerprints, some oils, whatnot from handling the watch and wearing the watch. But everything else is pretty darn pristine here, guys. And I love that even at this angle, you can see the light playing off of the domes of those crystals. Oh, man. And I do like, of course, that there is a good bit of contrast. Still quite legible. And again, these aren't sports watches, not a pilot's watch, field watch. You know, these aren't meant to be, you know, the pinnacle of functional timekeeping. These are really an expression of style, but of course built to a level that can be appreciated, you know, from an engineering or function forward standpoint as well. Oh man, these are cool. So okay, guys. A lot of thoughts, a lot of rambling here. On the wrist, these do wear larger and more balanced than the specs would suggest. I think a lot of you who might be thinking these are going to be too small for you might be shying away from them. And a lot of you with really small wrists are already rejoicing for these types of watches already and are kind of used to things being a little bit more bold on your wrist. But for those of us like me who have a slightly larger wrist, you might shy away from something like this. But again, I will say that these are extremely balanced at either scale. So yeah, initially I did go into this thinking the larger Neomatik would be the better fit, but now I'm, you know, again, quite torn on both in terms of the style differences and the scale. Like I would have, of course, I think out of their lineup, these are probably the two that, in terms of just the style, that I like the most, right? I like the Silvercut. I like the classic with just a little bit different pops of color. I like that power reserve indicator. I think it's very unique. And so for me, guys, yeah, these are just cool. And there are even more options, but definitely check the site links down in the description for those different options, and as well as availability, pricing, etc. In terms of comparable models, you know, I think while other brands may do Bauhaus for less, I think actually a more interesting comparable would be something like the 6L powered King Seikos or manual wind Grand Seikos that are going to be in a similar price bracket. Of course, those are going to be a little bit more on the I'd say probably the more ornate side in terms of some of those details, applied indices, and complex finishes. Here, this is definitely more on the minimalist, very clean, ultra dressy side, right? But on the little bit more of the everyday wing, I think those are actually pretty comparable, which I think is really interesting because they're such different types of watches. And I think in terms of the value proposition, these are right up there, guys. They're in-house, produced to a very high level, very vertically integrated. Even their particular movements that might be based on other things, you know, they still have their proprietary technologies put in there. So, you know, even if you're opting for some of their more entry-level options, you're still going to find a whole lot to appreciate, you know, in terms of the level of vertical integration. So for me, guys, bottom line, Nomos, they just strike this unique sweet spot of high design, value for money, and brand recognition with legitimate specs. Again, this isn't again the first time I've said this, but yeah, they're kind of like the Tudor of dress watches, and that's an extremely nice niche to lead in. You know, Tudor, they're so, I mean, they're very mainstream right now for the fact that they're just value leaders. And the thing that I love about Nomos is they just offer so much value. Are they perfect timepieces? No, I mean, no watch is perfect, right? But for what they offer, for what they deliver on, I think they stand out. Again, they just really do. They're an outstanding brand, and I really hope to add one of these watches to my personal core collection in the future. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.